This couldn't happen again. This is that one. This couldn't happen again. This is that one. This couldn't happen again. This is that one.
And we should be live. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, to another podcast, History of Yesterday podcast with me, Andrei, and Calin over here, your lovely hosts. So today, hopefully, we decided to go into a bit of a different historical debate, trying to look at historical bias, especially in the Cold War. But as me and Calin are on the side, on the argumentative side of the Second World War being a cause of the Cold War, we're going to start looking into some biases from that. So when we say biases, what we refer to is us being brought up in the Eastern Europe, and then having our higher education done in the West. We saw kind of both sides of history and how they basically been thought. And sadly to say, but it is the truth, both cases, in both regions, there are many lies that kind of try to portray that specific region to be shown as the hero, kind of, or the better person, the better ally, the better nation, or the more, how should I say this, a more ethical nation in modern history.
Yeah,
Is everything all right? Let's just check before
yeah.
we go into
I think
it.
we are good on everything. I was just gonna add on top of that obviously each country wants to show the best of itself to its citizens, but I think that's kind of changed, especially now that we do live in a world where it's not dominated anymore by just two superpowers that are trying to influence everyone to their side. It's countries have become a bit more honest. Specifically, when I think about that, I think of Germany, who in their secondary and primary education, when they teach their students about history, they make sure to talk about all of their crimes and everything along those lines that they did during the Second World War, especially. So, as part of the German curriculum, the Holocaust is something that is focused on a lot, because the Germans see the benefit, not the benefit, it's kind of a duty to tell the wider populace that this is what we did, but we are now a new country. But obviously, as the saying goes, if you don't know history, you're doomed to repeat it. And I think that obviously Germany's taken this very to heart. But that's not the case for all other countries, as we're going to look at now. Probably going to start with World War II, as Andrei said. And if you want to jump in with it, Andrei, I'll change the topic while you do that.
Just for a second, whoever is live right now, I just would like to ask if our microphones are too loud or too low. Just tell us, please, because the settings get changed every time, and we have to kind of check every time. For us, it sounds okay, but for some people, it might not. So that's why I'm asking now, so we can change it so it sounds good throughout the whole stream. Right. So as you change the title, as I said before, me and Calin believe that World War II, the end of World War II, played a big role into the start of the Cold War, because once Germany was defeated, obviously the two big powers that were upcoming, which was Soviet Union and America, wanted to split Germany into two. I mean, they wanted to take the most out of everything. And this is where we're going to start to look at the bias, because obviously if you're going to go into East Europe, which has been dominated by the Soviet Union for so many years, they have I don't like to say control the history, but it is what it is, into making people think, making in today's generation think that, well, it is true that the Soviet Union, let's say based on the Red Army, they have lost the most. And it's not just a number of soldiers, but everything as a whole. They lost the most in the Second World War. So they do have the right to kind of earn the most out of Germany and whatever reparation costs they have to pay. But at the same time, the Americans do have their own right, because they have also sacrificed so many lives. But as mentioned before, America has never seen war on their land during the Second World War, which is a big difference. And once again, if you're going to read an American, so I'll be specific here. If you're going to read an American history book, which I had the honor to, and if you're going to see the World War II section, in most cases they're going to start the end of the war by showing Stalin as the new Hitler, as in the new devil that has come to conquer Europe.
Yeah, to build onto that, I think that the point that the US has never seen like proper 20th century war on their land is quite a strong one, because especially when we weigh up the claim of who really won the Second World War for the Allies, many point towards the US to saying, oh yeah, it put all the industrial might behind the Red Army and the Allies on the Western Front. But in terms of who suffered the most, the American people, except for being put to work like every other citizen of every other country was being put to work at the time, and except for obviously the brave lives of the men and women who did go abroad to the African front, to the Western Front, and fought with the Allies, the civilians of America received Also, except for the civilians. Although, did civilians live in Pearl Harbor? Because I'm not quite
There were a
sure.
few, but you see, this is strange because at the time, I think there were a lot of people from Hawaii, which I don't know at the time if it was considered part of the United States or not. I'm not sure.
No, it was because it was a naval base.
Right. So
Oscar, wait, we have a comment from Oscar before we say anything. He said, "I almost gave up my life trying to type history of yesterday on a B road in the rain." That's the kind of commitment that we want to see to the stream.
Our loyal fans.
Loyal number one fan. Thank you for joining us.
From what I know is that many of the U.S. soldiers that were supposed to go to Pearl Harbor were recruited into the Pearl Harbor military base, were able to, if they wanted, but I don't think this goes for privates, this goes for higher ranks, to take their families with them to live over there.
What's it again?
So higher ranks, not privates or anything like.
Oh, okay, no, I see what you're talking about. Wait, I think my phone's peaking a little bit. I'll turn it down.
So I think they were allowed to take their family members with them to live over there. Yeah.
Yeah, but except for obviously the unfortunate events that happened at Pearl Harbor and the other islands that the US owned in the Pacific, the citizens of America really didn't see the direct effects of war in the way that the citizens of France, the citizens, although to a lesser extent, Britain, and the citizens of the USSR saw. It's when we look at who contributed the most in the war and who really won the war for the Allies, we also have to look at the sacrifices that each side made, because it's good supplying the weapons to your friends, but if they're doing all the hard work, you can't really claim that you are the victors.
But you see, I need to stop you there for a second. But you see, it's not only about the sacrifice, but the position you are put in. Because Russia, upon Germany reaching Stalingrad, they didn't really have a choice. It was pretty much either they win this thing, they turn it around, or they're pretty much doomed.
True.
They weren't going to get any more help from the Americans. And even if they did get any more help from the Americans, it wouldn't really have made much of a difference. Because what they really needed is, at the time, what they really need is real manpower. And I'm not talking about, you see, because I'm not talking about having, obviously they had the numbers, but having a different kind of military power which actually had high morale, which is very vital.
Yeah, Oscar said that apparently 68 civilians died during Pearl Harbor, which obviously it's a quite a lot of people, but it's not the numbers that we see of the civilians that died in Belgium, Netherlands, France, USSR, so on and so forth, Poland. From what my historical understanding and my obvious bias is that due to the United States not really experiencing the full brunt of the war and really just fueling their allies and obviously contributing to the war, of course, with manpower, they were a big part of why the Allies won, and it's quite obvious that without the support of the Americans, things like the invasion of France in 1944 and other like the counterattack that the Soviets created wouldn't have been possible or as successful, because the USSR was kept afloat with a lot of American equipment. Food like Spam was sent over from America to the citizens of the USSR and actually became a staple because of the Second World War, and it started to be created in the USSR. And tanks, weapons, a wide range of equipment was sent over and was vital for the Red Army to keep fighting on the Eastern Front. Sorry, and without it, it's unlikely that the Red Army could have been as successful and pushed back the Germans as far as it did, all the way up to Berlin, as we now see, as we've seen through history.
And but then again, you see, it's this thing, like you mentioned, it's because in their books they say, well, we supplied so much for you, but they never say you fought our war.
Yeah.
Which in the first part of the Second War, it's pretty much what happened.
Yeah.
they gave him the supplies that they needed, and the Russians will fight. So I know that this will start probably a different argument, and I just want to mention it, and we'll go past it. But having the Americans, because most Western historians say that the Americans didn't want to join the Second World War, not until because they didn't really have any benefits from it, which is true. I'm not going to lie, but I mean, you having so many nations, having especially Japan, which they were going back and forth between the alliances, either becoming allies or not. And what the Americans wanted from the Japanese nation was technological advancement, which they needed at the time. So it's this thing where they say we didn't want to join the war, so we're gonna kind of just supply whatever you need, as well as Britain and other allies, and you can do the job for us. And see, this is another mistake that, I'm gonna be honest, Eastern European history books do, where they say that America just tried to actually pay someone else to fight their war, not necessarily the Soviet Union itself, but you get the gist.
Yeah, what I was going to say is that America, before the official declaration of war, and even a bit into the war before they joined the Allies officially, still had American companies in Germany who actually collaborated with the Nazi Party in ways that obviously we deem despicable today. So things like a branch of IBM helped with the organization of the Holocaust, and other companies such as this helped out the country. And rather than putting an embargo to this and obviously putting a stop to the Germans getting help from American companies, America kind of just stood by the sideline. It was like, if there is money to be made, then we will sell guns to the British, we will sell guns to the French, we will continue to work with the Germans, or not directly work because it wasn't the US government, but it was big US companies such as IBM being, until the later stages of the 20th century, probably one of the biggest companies in America. And overall, it's from the side, this is more of a Eastern perspective to it. From an Eastern perspective of it, although it's completely biased, America was taking advantage of the war, which to an extent is true, because they made a lot of money, and America prospered a lot because of the Second World War, because their economy was built up to such a great extent due to them supplying all of the allies and then helping them rebuild after the war, that it kind of catapulted America into the spot of the leader of the Western world after the Second World War, as they kind of stood as a bastion for the West. After supplying them and helping them rebuild, the West kind of looked to America and they were like, well, they've done so much for us, they're obviously going to be leading us. And something like that didn't really happen on the Eastern Front. It was rather the opposite, because the USSR, although we hear claims of like it puppeting everyone, there's like some of it is true, and the USSR occupation, especially at the beginning, was very forceful and very bad for a lot of the countries there, especially East Germany, as it was East Germany, as in the forms of reparations, was stripped of all of his factories, all of his industry, and many of his resources, the few that I had left after the war, were taken away to Russia as reparation. And a lot of other Eastern European countries had to rather pay reparations than get help from their leader, as you would say. If you think of America as being the leader, then we think of the USSR being the leader. What happened with the East is the opposite happened, where the USSR would take resources from the East to help rebuild itself. But this is looking at two different scenarios, because this is from a Western perspective, what I've just said now. The way that I think about it is that America was able to give out all of these things and give out all of these resources because their land was not ravaged by war, and they had all of this industry available, all of this manpower to feed its industry, which meant that them helping. They didn't have to take from other countries to rebuild themselves. But on the other hand, the USSR threw so much at the Germans to win this conflict that they couldn't really rebuild themselves. So they were in a scenario where they couldn't really afford to help. Although they were a bigger country, they couldn't really afford to help their allies. Even though they forced these people to become their allies, they couldn't really afford to help them because they couldn't help themselves. So I say this because many historians frame it that, the USSR came into the East and just razed it to the ground, took all the resources back to Moscow because they're evil communists and wanted to destroy the East so that communist uprisings would come out of it and the East would continue to be aligned with the USSR. But in reality, if we look at a more unbiased view of it, we have to realize that the USSR was in a much different spot than the US at the end of the conflict. The USSR was ravaged and needed years to rebuild and required resources, where the US had they were at the height of their power and had industry. They had everything they could and could afford to spread their influence through the use of these kind of resources. We have someone on Facebook, I think, they're saying, welcome to Bashpur, South India, welcome to Columbus, South India. I'm guessing that's the area where you live. Hello there. We thank you for tuning into our stream.
What I wanted to add on everything that you said is give a bit of a perspective between these two things, and I think with this we can also dwell into more of the start of the Cold War. You see, there's this thing where I hate saying it this way, but capitalists don't actually understand communism. They think that communism is the same from World War II since the end of the Cold War, which is wrong. Communism was very different, and communism was implied very differently by each leader that took part into the Soviet Union. For example, if we take a look at since the start of Stalin's reign until the end, yes, it is true, the Soviet Union and every country that was taken under the wing of the Soviet Union or puppeteered, like Calin says, they were driven with a gun to the head. Simple as. That is the whole truth. So there is no biased thing when the capitalists say that way, because that is true. However, after Stalin, things have started to kind of chill down. It wasn't the same anymore. And also one thing that I wanted to add with this, to Callan's comment, is that you see, when the USSR had to repair after World War II, obviously they didn't have the resources. So what they did is pretty much, we're going to go to our neighboring countries, we're going to take the resources that we require, then we're going to put a gun to the head and say join communism, and that we're going to take the resources. And then what they did is also to pay back after the Soviet Union kind of started rebuilding and starting to raise their economy, especially based on the labor power and the manpower that they had at the time, which was vital to reconstruct everything. They gave back, and they gave back through trying to invest into the infrastructure, which was built for communistic purposes. However, they built something. So they take it. What my point is here, they take it away, but they also give them back.
But they didn't give back to the same extent that they took, especially in countries like Germany.
Yes.
I know to a certain extent Romania, there was a lot of woodland and oil that was taken from
Actually,
us.
Romania, I think, if we were to look statistically, they put more than they gave back. I mean, they gave back more than they taken.
I don't know.
It depends on the resources, because at the end of World War II, Romania was pretty much out of everything because Germans took everything. So they didn't really have much to take from Romania in the first place.
It's obviously a double-sided argument, because Romania was a country that was kind of abused by both Germany and the USSR, as we fed Germany with oil and then gave away land for the purpose of keeping our independence and then fighting for more land. And then the USSR came in and they were like, we need these resources, and took that. But in the end, we ended up building decent infrastructure, and we were one of the most powerful countries in the Eastern Bloc. and I'm pretty sure we're still one of the biggest economies in the East. But a discussion of how Romania evolved is probably for another day.
That's more political.
Yeah.
Let's not get into too much politics.
Well, I'm guessing you want to move on a bit into the Cold War, because I'll change the topic if you want to start talking about that.
So at the beginning of the Cold War, we had obviously Germany separated into the West and the East. The East being controlled by the Soviet Union and the West being controlled by America. The main problem was here that obviously both big powers at the time, they were trying to literally squeeze Germany for everything they had, because they saw that they deserve pretty much everything that the country had to offer, because sort of as reparation. However, I do see it stupid, because Germany at the time, because of the 1945 incident, it was pretty much destroyed. It was the most destroyed country in Europe due to the Second World War. So there wasn't much to take. The only thing that they could have taken at that point was obviously there was a lot of armament left. There was a lot of technology a lot of research and development that the Germans dwelt into, but they never finished to take. And still don't know exactly what happened to the other half of the Nazi treasure, which is considered to be one of the biggest treasures in Europe. I think it was hidden in Switzerland, but God knows.
We might never know. What I was going to say is, I mean, I'd say to a certain extent the West wasn't as ravaged by the Allies after the war, because the Allies worked with the West to a certain extent to try to rebuild it. But I'd also kind of disagree a little bit with Germany being the most destroyed country in Europe, because I'm pretty sure Poland was basically leveled by the end of the war. Although obviously Germany's probably at least probably second, but I'd say Poland after the all of the concentration camp. All of the concentration camps that there was.
I should mention. I just referred to infrastructure.
Oh,
I might be wrong. I'm not saying I might be wrong.
I mean, I don't think Poland had much infrastructure before the war, and Germany built a lot of autobahns and everything. So maybe in terms of infrastructure, maybe France would have been up there as well. But yeah, the Germany was definitely destroyed. I want to see where you're going with this though. Well,
what I'm trying to go with this is that, you're trying to pretty much squeeze something out of something that there isn't any more juice into. So this is what both powers were trying to fight. Again, they were trying to fight by trying to control half of each country, half of Germany, one half, another half. Rather than bashing head into head, trying to start another war, they were trying to sort of puppeteer, I don't like to use that word, but puppeteer each half of the country and trying to control each part, the citizens of each part, by having a communist reign and a capitalistic reign. Having obviously a leader from the Soviet Union and a leader from America, even though I think he was an American. I'm not sure.
No.
He was European from a European from the West, but I don't remember. I think he might have been Swiss.
I think both leaders were just. I think in both cases, both leaders were just Germans, but they were obviously specifically elected by the people who were ruling over the sectors.
Germans that have lived either in the West or the East during the Second World War, I would imagine.
From what my
details.
From my understanding, well, obviously before the West was unified under one country, because at the beginning of the war, at the end of the war, the West was split into three sections. There was the French-controlled section, British-controlled section, American-controlled section. And I'd hazard a guess, because I'm not very good with early Cold War German history, that each sector had a representative from that specific sector elected by the country controlling the sector to kind of oversee everything. Again, I don't I kind of get what I mean, that each country, probably especially France, was trying to get as much as they could out of the
to be more specific, what I mean is that it's not just getting resources, but trying to show the power that each country, each nation has that was controlling each side. So the Soviet Union was trying to imply communism and trying to show to the German citizens whilst that they were devastated anyways because of the conditions that they had to live in, the ghettos especially, why communism is great, and then the West trying to show to the West civilians why capitalism is great.
Yeah.
Even though they were bashing head to head because it doesn't matter communism or capitalism, those people had nothing to eat.
True.
So when you're hungry, it doesn't matter what you follow. You
Yeah.
follow whatever gives you food. And it was this kind of a control where the Germans, whoever, even if we're talking about a civilian, even if we're talking about a hobo, even if we're talking about someone in the higher hierarchy, someone who might be a representative of the certain region, you give them food, you give them something, they will talk whatever you want them to talk. And they didn't really have a choice.
Yeah.
And I think this is sort of kind of correlates well with historical bias, because we don't really talk about history being controlled. But when you talk about history being controlled, this is what I'm referring to more. When you pretty much putting a gun to someone's head or trying to get them in that position where they're desperate and they really don't have any space for movement, they have to go straight. They don't really have a choice.
Yeah.
But I guess if you were to argue, Germans and Germany in general at that time, they didn't really have a choice. They were controlled.
True. I mean, it's obvious that going back to the point of how each country educates its citizens, on each side of the Iron Curtain, each country portrayed their. Sorry, I'll throw someone out the door. Yeah, each country portrayed their side of the war in a way that benefited them. So, except for maybe Germany, as although in the early stages of like post World War II Germany, I don't know how good the education was because obviously they were focusing on rebuilding. But this kind of indoctrination has made a lot of the stories that we look at from the early stages of the Cold War seem very biased, because we don't really see a neutral stance. I'm talking about this. A really good example that came to my mind when we were initially brainstorming this topic was the Cuban Missile Crisis, which I think it's something that it's wildly learnt about. Doesn't matter what country we're in, UK, US, Romania, Poland, Russia.
Very important parts of the Cold War.
Yeah, it's one of the big turning points of the Cold War. And from my experience here in the West, historians portrayed the Cuban Missile Crisis as the USSR spontaneously seeing that they have these mid-range missiles that they can't strike America with, and they were like, well, we have an ally quite close, which is Cuba, and we might also just move all the missiles there. But in reality, a more unbiased view would be that during the latter stages of the early stages of the Cold War, the US wanted to have a way to strike at the USSR, obviously because there was the arms race going on. Each side had nukes, and they had to use the mutually assured destruction doctrine to make sure that each side didn't nuke each other to death. So they had to move.
Putting a gun on each other's head.
Yeah. So the US also had a lot of these mid-range missiles that they couldn't strike Moscow with from all the way from the US. So they installed these missiles in the Allied countries close to the USSR, specifically Italy and Turkey. And this is obviously quite close. Turkey is just across the Black Sea from the USSR because Ukraine was part of the USSR at the time. So it was the missiles in Turkey could hit Moscow, and that applies for the missiles in Italy. And this was done obviously to deter the people in the USSR leadership from striking, because now you had missiles pointed at Moscow, St. Petersburg, Stalingrad. I don't think it was named Volgograd back then, but old Stalingrad, now Volgograd, and all of these big important cities. And the mutually assured destruction doctrine wasn't really working here because the US had an assured way of striking at the heart of the USSR, and the USSR didn't have an assured way to strike at the heart of the US. So the USSR was kind of at the mercy of America at the time, and to flip the table or to equalize the odds of in case of a conflict, each side could strike at each other. They moved all of their missiles to they moved a bunch of mid-range missiles to Cuba, which obviously the US saw as an aggression, which it was more of a again, in my opinion, a slightly Eastern biased historical view. It was just a response to aggression that the US initially started. So in response to that aggression, they moved all of these mid-range missiles to Cuba, where they could strike at the US. So the tables were now leveled. The US could strike at Moscow from Italy and Turkey, and the Soviets could now strike at Washington D.C., New York, all of the East Coast cities with their missiles in Cuba. But obviously, President Kennedy at the time didn't really like this idea of the USSR being on their doorstep, and the events of the Cuban Missile Crisis started to unfold. There was an embargo on Cuba, which, from what I've read, is actually an act of war. So, obviously the Cubans couldn't really declare war against the US, so it was more just a bullying tactic. But the US blockaded Cuba to make sure that Soviet missiles couldn't enter Cuba anymore. And there was a standoff where we got really close to starting a nuclear war if it wasn't for one brave submarine commander who there was a Soviet submarine which was surveying the situation under the American lines, and they were hit by a submarine mine, and two of the generals, well, not two of the generals, the whole submarine ship thought that the war started, and they were gearing up to they had nuclear missiles on the submarine, and they were gearing up to fire them. And if it wasn't for you had to shoot these nuclear missiles, you needed to have 3 confirmation keys from the 3 commanders on the ship, and 2 of the commanders gave the keys to turn on the missile, obviously, and 1 didn't and swallowed the key. And after that, the events unfolded. Obviously Khrushchev and Kennedy spoke on the phone. They were like, "This is getting a bit close. We should probably reach a consensus," and they both did reach a consensus. The USSR removed them.
That's why I just want to stop you there and point out again. You see, this is where the sort of Stalin's communistic reign kind of changes. So the Soviet leaders actually decide to speak and communicate rather than just attack.
Yeah.
As the communists are portrayed in Western history.
Yeah.
And also, what I wanted to add on that is, again, we are seeing here how when an important event happens, especially in the Cold War, because it was pretty much a war that was based on propaganda. When an important event that was apparently not caused by the Western world or the Americans, they would really try to use propaganda to show the opposite side, trying to show that, hey, look, this is what happened. We did this because of the Soviets, but the Soviets didn't do anything. Whilst the Soviets kept always quiet. They didn't really talk to the public. They only kept their propaganda within their nation, not really trying to extend to a worldwide publicity.
Yeah, well, where was I? I was saying, oh yeah, so obviously after that the Cold War kind of like started to cool down a little bit, because obviously that got to a point where it was quite heated, where the 2 countries were at each other's throats. So in response to the USSR removing the missiles from Cuba, the US removed their missiles from Turkey. And again, this is another point I don't really see often mentioned in Western history books, or it does seem to be mentioned sometimes, but not to the same extent as everything else. Is
and
that
the exact nation.
although the USSR did remove their missiles from Cuba, this was in response. The US had to also remove their missiles from Turkey, because that was the consensus the 2 leaders arrived to. Many people just kind of portray this as like, Kennedy just forcefully told the Soviets that they're going to start a war if they don't remove the missiles from Cuba, and they just backed off. But that's not true, because obviously the Soviets didn't want to remove the only deterrent that they had, so they forced the Americans to also scale back their missile presence in Europe. Although I'm not sure if they removed the missiles from Italy or not. I don't remember exactly.
I don't think they did. I think they kept the ones in Italy.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's just Turkey.
It might have been that the Soviet Union at the time didn't know about the presence of the missiles.
No. They knew about it, but it wasn't. I don't think it. The missiles in Italy could reach as vital places as the ones in Turkey could, because obviously Turkey's a bit closer. The missiles in Turkey had the range to reach Moscow. I'm pretty sure the ones in Italy didn't have that kind of range.
Probably just hit like Ukraine or something, Belarus.
Yeah.
Maybe.
But this is the kind of thing that we're talking about. Like, obviously it's a point of contention, because too many historians that write about this, you could look at it from the lens of each side. You can look at it from the Soviet side, which is the Americans aggressed on like the Americans are the aggressors because they took the first step. Or you could look at it from the point of the Soviet side, where you could from the American side, and you could say, oh, the missiles in Europe were just a deterrent for. I'll stop quickly to we have a new follower, SigGamer007. Thank you for following us.
Thank you.
To continue what I was saying, you could look at it from the American side, where you could say, oh, the missiles in Europe were just a deterrent, because obviously the events that were happening around that time, the Berlin Wall, the segregation of the East Berlin from West Berlin, and so on. You could say that the Americans were just making sure that their allies, specifically West Germany and West Berlin, were safe, and these missiles were there as a deterrent for USSR aggression. This is why I wanted to kind of like jump on this point and be like, each side is obviously going to look at it from their point of view. But if we want to be real historians, and if we want to look at history in such a way that we're not fooled by this kind of bias, we must look at both events, and then make up our own mind. I'm obviously I have my own conclusion that I made from these events. Andrei as well probably has his own conclusion on who's in the wrong, who's in the right here.
This is the thing, because many people, when we write about something or we do a podcast, they ask, but what is your opinion? I can't really share my opinion because, like Calin just mentioned, as historians or as upcoming historians that we're trying to be, staying unbiased is the main thing.
Yeah.
We have our own theories, our own thoughts, but we don't utilize them in our written work nor in the podcast that we present. If you want to know them, you can send an email, ask privately, we have a discussion. But yeah.
And we can see things like this throughout the Cold War, which is obviously the Cold War was a really big information war, as each side was trying to portray their ideology as being the best ideology. And a really big point of contention throughout the Cold War is probably the space race, because the space race was probably the biggest battle of prestige between the two powers, as whoever made the next milestone was seen as the leader of science between the two at the time. So obviously when the first satellite went into orbit, Sputnik, the Americans were quite scared and looked at it as the USSR getting ahead in the technological battle. And again, when the first animal went to space, Laika, that was another milestone that the USSR broke, that the US tried to play down. And as the space race continued, the USSR kept breaking milestones. And like first man in space, Yuri Gagarin, first spacewalk by Leonov, I think. And so on and so forth. And the deciding event that decided the space race for.
And see, this is go on. I'll mention it after.
So
Because I
then,
know what you want to say already.
yeah, no. What I was gonna say. So it's the deciding event that at least the West claims to end the space race is the one the Americans managed to get to first, which is getting to the moon first. I want to just say caveat here because obviously getting to the moon is another magnitude of achievement. Putting a satellite in space, obviously an amazing achievement, but at the same time, the technology was kind of still available there as the Nazi scientists kind of pioneered rocketeering, and the technology to have this ball in space was there. It just needed to be put through. Putting the first animal in space was very impressive also, but like I didn't get down alive from that trip.
And one thing that I need to note on that is that the Westerns saw that as quite a cruel act. Which just seemed stupid to me in a way, because people will understand why I say this, because if the Americans were to do it, they wouldn't have said the same thing.
Yeah, obviously each side has its own moral compass.
And
but
this is where I want to go on to, because every time we think of space, every time we think of our humanity or our history as humans evolving to the next step, we see Neil Armstrong, but we never talk about the previous. So it's always the Americans, it's always the West that kind of try to set the stone into history with their own history. I'm not saying it's forced, but the way it is portrayed, it's shown in such a way that it's trying to kind of remove other parts of history or make them invalid.
I'd say because if we look at the same topic, obviously, we have this point of contention where even in the East now, to a certain extent, the name of Neil Armstrong is obviously parroted a lot when we look at the space race, because obviously he was the first man on the moon. But names such as Yuri Gagarin or Lenvov or other are seldom heard of in these kind of courses. And although they didn't play as big of a part in these events, they are still key players in the space race. And it's I think it's a bit of a disservice to these people who push these boundaries that they are not talked about, because obviously a lot of these on both sides, actually, a lot of these people sacrificed even their lives to push humanity to this final frontier, and many of them were very selfless about it, especially in the case of I don't remember exactly the space flight, but I know there was a Soviet cosmonaut who was going. So it was a mission where Yuri Gagarin was meant to break the record of the longest time in space, and the other cosmonaut offered himself up for the trip because he knew that this spaceship was faulty and there was no way to get the flight to not go ahead. And if Yuri would have gone into space, he would have died. So he knew that he was going to die as a result of this flight, and he still went ahead with it. And things like this obviously has happened in the West as well, and many of these people have given up their lives, but they are seldom talked about in media. Like, we hear like 30,000 like movies and like articles about Neil Armstrong and the achievements that he made, but then we Western bias, we don't really talk about the achievements of Yuri Gagarin and the Soviet space race, even though they are of equal merit at some extent. Yeah.
Very true.
Um,
Abruptly ended over there. We'll maybe ask the people in our live viewers, maybe they have some questions or anything about that.
If anyone wants to ask anything, give a bit of input.
I wanted to show it, I wanted to mention it, but I don't think that the Twitch comments are showing up on the stream thing.
Yeah, I'm not sure why. I'm going to try to get that fixed now. But look in chat and see if anyone has anything.
So we had the comments from Oscar previously. We have a new comment from Sick Gamer 007 saying, "Keep it going, both of you. You're doing great. Very interesting subject, by the way. Love it. Sorry for interrupting. No interruption. Like
No,
we
no,
said,
no.
we are trying to do these podcasts. We don't want just us talking. This is why we're trying to get people involved, get people asking questions, because we don't want to just sit here and lecture people about history story. That's kind of boring. That's why we want questions. We want to see different perspectives from different people. So please join. Please have your comments, have your questions.
And as we've explored today, history is something that you can't have one right answer about, and this is what having a discussion about it is very interesting and is kind of required if we want to explore these kind of topics, because one person might think something about these events and another person might think something else, because obviously each side has experienced something differently. There is never going to be, and I don't think there is ever gonna, I don't think there's ever been, or there is going to be ever, unbiased history, as
Sure.
we always look at events from our own perspective. Like, we could have two people looking at the same person doing a task, and then when they try to describe that task, each person might give a different recounting of the events that happened. And that is because as we grow up with certain biases towards different things.
I have actually a perfect example of that. I'm kind of trying to bring in my degree to use. So if as I study human resource management and law psychology, seeing the perspective between two people is kind of my thing. So to give you a perfect example to describe this, right? You put two people in front of each other on a table, and you put a piece of paper that has a 6 on it. One person sees a 6, and the other person sees a 9. They're both right.
Yeah.
So you can't really argue with neither of them.
They're obviously seeing the same thing, but they are both right.
You need to understand why the person opposite you sees a 9 and why you're seeing a 6, and vice versa. And this is why we're kind of here to try. This is why we want people to join, to actually. We don't know everything, by the way, because it always seems like we know everything, but we're still young. We're trying to learn a lot of history. We have been interested in history from a very young age, and this is why we kind of pursued all of this. But we're trying to set records straight, and that was kind of our main mission, to bring the truth out, even how bad, how good it may sound, or whatever. I think that getting to the bottom of the truth, it's the most important lesson that we can have from history.
What I wanted to mention is that I think we have a quite unique perspective, because we were obviously born on one side of history and kind of grew up on the other, if we talk about history being a very east versus west kind of battle. And that has allowed us to kind of take a secondary perspective to everything that we've been taught on both sides, and be like, well, one side says something, one side says something else. What's really actually happened? So, as an example, maybe I didn't do a lot of history because I left Romania a bit earlier, but Andrei did a bit more, and I'm sure that he was taught about some events. But obviously there is things like...
Again, it was pretty much just like, as Romania was a neighboring country of the Soviet Union, and as they were indoctrinated into communism right after the end of World War II, pretty much, I mean, it's all Eastern biased.
Yeah.
There's nothing else I can say about it.
And that kind of bias still stands there today. A lot of the older generation, which was...
those history books, they don't change. They just get new they just get new editions, and that's pretty much it. It's the same content over and over again, and people accept it because it's their history. There's still that indoctrination that has happened almost 100 years ago. It still keeps going. Yeah. And until someone doesn't step in to actually stop it, it's never gonna.
What I was gonna say is that although we've like grown up and the world's changed, this kind of bias still stands with some of the older generation who has been indoctrinated by these people, by the system. Still think of the US as being this devil that's trying to control the world, and like it obviously like the bad guy, you could say. But in America, obviously, there's still people who think that Russians, even though they're not communists anymore, just Russians in general are like devils, or just communists in general, or even socialist policies. As many politicians use the word socialist in America to kind of like scare the older and more numerous older generation away from policies that might be beneficial to them, which
And
is
you would be
Yeah.
surprised that there are more communist countries than Russia right now at this time in Europe.
mm,
And then again, it's just about again propaganda that has lived for years and years onwards, and it keeps on going. We have a comment from Silent Control who asks, "Do you think the Cold War make the productivity faster than normal?" From my perspective, I would say yes, because they pushed both the most powerful nations, which at the time had most resources, to actually build in the industrial sector as much as possible, especially trying to build weapons, trying to build a lot of infrastructure, but especially weapons, because it was an arms race at the end of the day. What's good about it, though, is after the Cold War has finished, most of these factories that were used to build all the weapons, all these arms, have been converted to, I don't know, used for whatever,
like
food,
consumer
or,
goods.
yeah, consumer goods.
Um,
More what's your perspective on it, Calin?
sorry, what'd you say?
What's your perspective on the question? I thought
Um,
Mike had a different view,
yeah,
that's why.
I think that as somebody who's been studying economics as well, competition always is always good, and there is no better competition than another person trying to kill you, which is why we see massive technological spikes during wars, such as obviously World War One. Created a lot of technology and innovated a lot of the things that we still can use today, and the same applies for World War Two. Obviously, without German scientists and the World War Two requiring the creation of these V1 and V2 rockets that Hitler pushed the German scientists to make, it is unlikely that the space race would have happened this early and it would have accelerated this quickly. And this kind of applies to most areas of technology and industry and weaponry or anything you can talk about, as each side wanted to kind of show off. And there is no better way of showing off than being prosperous, and through being prosperous, achieving these milestones that you kind of without talking set between the two countries. Such as like there was no conference where the Americans and Soviets were like, "Oh, we're going to make putting the first man in space a milestone," or "We're going to make putting the first man on the moon a milestone." But both countries worked towards it in a bid to show everyone that they are better than the other country. And without this competition, I don't think there would have been as big of an incentive to pour, especially for the Soviet Union, who was in the later stages of the space race, struggling financially. Yeah, I don't think there would have been as big of an incentive, and thus it wouldn't have probably happened. So, long story short, yes, because the competition made it so that each country wanted to show their best side, and showing their best side meant pushing as much as they could towards being better, and then that meant trying to become better faster and faster.
Although the Soviet Union didn't really need that much infrastructure for industrial purposes, as they have the labor
Yeah.
power.
The USSR did have to build up quite a large industry to beat back the Germans. So it's kind of that wasn't a massive point of contention, because both countries did have a quite sizable industrial force which allowed them to compete during the Cold War. But obviously the difference between the two giants in terms of economic strength kind of diverged as the Cold War went on, and Russia, especially during the oil crash of the 70s, if I'm correct, I think it's the later stages of the 70s, as the USSR economy was, and like similar to now, as Russia's economy is based, not entirely, but it's quite reliant on their sale of natural gas and petrol. It was quite impacted by the crash of the oil prices at that time, and that was probably a time where this hunt for prestige was tested the most, as the USSR continued to do these space missions and continued to either kind of work with and or fight against America, as there was joint missions between America and the USSR. I think in '74 the Soyuz Apollo mission, when both countries had astronauts which met up in space, but it was obviously at a time where the USSR couldn't really afford it, and they still poured a lot of resources through. But from my understanding, I think the Americans poured a bit more resources in there, but obviously due to the circumstances on the time, it's a bit understandable.
It's a bit arguable because you see, another perspective which Western history books don't show is that Russia and the Soviet Union, in its instance, during the Cold War, it was very poor. Yes, it had a lot of guns, and that's because most of the taxes that people paid were going into guns. They weren't going into infrastructure, they weren't going into schools, they weren't going into the public services. Everything was poured in. Pretty much almost half of the salary, if not more, of what people made were taken by tax due to communism, and they were poured into weapons, military equipment. And this is why I kind of want to say this, because you saying that American technology might have been a bit more advanced, but that's just due. I would say, this is my opinion, that is just due because they have taken more scientists from the German the German V2 rocket scientists, whatever you want to call them. They have taken more of them. So,
from my understanding, from what I've been kind of taught, is that the people, in terms of weaponry, the Soviets had an advantage at the beginning of the Cold War, and they slowly started to lose as the Cold War went on.
And they stopped from the Second World War.
Yeah. But yeah, it's that's probably another argument for another day, talking about technological advancements and something along those lines.
We're going off.
Yeah, we're going off on a tangent again.
This is why we kind of want people to interact, and now I'll show an example again. For these kind of reasons, just so we can move on from topic to topic and kind of leave minutes to see if anyone else has any questions or any inputs. If not, I think we will call it a day.
Yeah, we've been speaking for an hour. I think we've run through and we've explained quite well what we were.
I know that many people might have maybe expected us to go through other parts of the Cold War as being biased. Again, the Cold War is very big. We will be sitting here for quite a year also, just the whole Cold War. But like I said, always remember to drop us an email at historyofyesterday@gmail.com. Whatever you want us to discuss in future podcasts, we will try to make up some topics. If we don't know it, we will call in a guest to help us build up a discussion. We might have a guest for our next podcast, which at the moment we do not know when it's going to be because we are both kind of tight on schedule.
Yeah.
But we will surely let you know on our Facebook page and social media pages.
All of the links of all our social media is down below on most of the streaming platforms that we are doing this on. So if you do want to follow us on Facebook, Twitch, YouTube, whatever, to keep yourselves updated with what we're doing with the podcast, make sure to follow the links in the descriptions to find all of these platforms.
We're currently streaming on 3 different platforms at the same time. So that's Facebook, Twitch, and YouTube. Go on.
I was gonna say the situation with YouTube is still kind of sketchy. I think YouTube, was it okay today?
Yeah. It didn't stop.
So
it's good.
YouTube's been a bit sketchy, but it seems to be alright now. So or you can view our stream on any platform you want, but I'd probably recommend Twitch, as I think it receives the best quality and has the least delay out of all of the other streams that we stream to.
At least Facebook has, I think, almost a minute, and so does YouTube, or at least around that. Anyways, we'll just wait 2 more minutes to see if anyone has any other questions.
I'll change the topic to outro while we're here.
I hope that you guys enjoyed today's stream,
Yep.
today's podcast. Thank you for those who did come in with an input.
Yep.
Really helps us to keep going.
If you guys want to give us ideas again, follow Andrei's instructions and email us historyofyesterday@gmail.com. In terms of our next topic, if we do not have a guest, I think we said that we either want to explore alternate history again, or we might just have a further delve into bias in history, as I think both topics are quite expansive and we could talk about that a lot. What about domino theory? Still want to learn that from you guys. Domino theory is actually quite good. That's still early Cold War. We know like early Cold, like just Cold War in general is probably like our expertise, or at least my expertise. So I think that would be a good idea actually. So I'm gonna note that down actually.
Do you want to give a quick explanation right now?
I think that it deserves its own stream because it has such a big impact on the Cold War.
I know it's long to discuss, yeah.
So yeah, so definitely domino theory next time I think, because I reckon we could talk for at least like half an hour, 45 minutes about it, because it has such big implications for the Cold War.
So I guess it's gonna be the domino theory, and we'll maybe some other parts of the Cold War.
Yeah.
I think what we should discuss, which isn't really discussed once again, and it's part of a history bias, I think maybe the Afghan War.
The Afghan War. That is kind of part of like domino theory though. We could kind of tie that in, because we like domino theory started with McCarthy, I think, and McCarthy's quite early. So that would be like start of the Cold War to the end of the Cold War, because it's kind of a doctrine that America followed throughout the Cold War and still kind of follows now, although to a lesser extent. You see Donald Trump trying to like kind of like revive it with like all of these sanctions with China and everything, but obviously
go on, finish.
No, they say what you want to say, because I'm just going to time.
You know what we should implement? We should implement getting too political alerts.
Oh yeah. Have a little counter at the top, like every time we start talking about modern politics, we have something on there.
We just shut the stream out of nowhere.
No, but I think it's good because we have to tie the topics that we're talking about to
present, yeah.
Because you can look at history in a vacuum, but it's obvious that history impacts the world that we live in today. Because if it wasn't for history, it's obvious that we wouldn't our world would look different depending on historical events, and everything that happens today ties in historically. Sun Control says it was a good stream. I hope you make these streams more often. We're going to try to keep them twice a week. Yeah. But it depends on our schedule, because obviously you can see from a different background, I've moved to university and my schedule is still uncertain.
I wanted to say again, you guys' inputs, your inputs, any sort of concerns, any sort of improvements that we can make. It's
suggestions.
Really suggestions. It would really be helpful to us. We know we have to. There's still a space for improvement. I know that.
Yeah, I mean, we're obviously both quite new at this, and we're trying to make this as high quality as we can, and I know that we can do more to make this higher quality, and making the stream a bit more often would probably be one of those. But we will, as I get into my year into university and I get like a more definitive schedule, we'll definitely try to see if we can do it more often.
Like I mentioned before at the beginning when we started our first podcast, we are writers, we're not spokesperson. So
yeah,
talking for such a long time, especially for me, it's
I think
it's a good exercise. Yeah, it's getting, especially when you know something and the arguments going, and this is why we want you guys to come as often as possible and have more people on the stream, so we can have more questions, more perspectives, more opinions, more to talk about. So we don't just sit there and say,
Yeah.
I think I just want to ask for the people that have been here. How many times have you said or been stuck like that? Because I don't think we do that. Do
No,
we
no,
do
no.
that?
We've been quite good at that recently. I don't think
We know
we've been getting a bit better. I mean, obviously the first streams were a bit more sketchy because we were still learning,
We weren't
but
comfortable. Yeah, I mean,
but-
it's uncomfortable, especially the first time. You know, when you
well,
never done.
yeah, we're much more in like the flow of things now. Yeah, but I think we're going off on a tangent here again. We should probably end the stream with being going off on the outro tangent for like 13 minutes. So with that said,
We're enjoying it, and people
Yeah.
are helping here.
with everything said, thank you for joining us once again. I hope you guys come next time, where we're going to be doing a domino theory as suggested by
I just want to say, I think it might be in the weekend.
yeah, probably Sunday.
Sunday. Yes.
Yeah, probably to around the same time because later at night is going to be a bit more sketchy as there is a lot of background noise for me. So
Now we used to do them around 7, but
yeah,
probably earlier. We'll see. Like I said, we're going to try and plan a certain schedule, which is going to have the exact day and the exact hour, and it's going to keep on going for weeks and weeks on end. But right now, both of our schedules are kind of flexible, not set.
yeah.
Better say. So yeah. But I hope you enjoyed, and hope to see all of you tune in next time. Like I said, I will drop a post on each social media page of our History of Yesterday publication about when the next podcast is going to take place. So do check it out.
Well, yeah. So thank you guys for watching. I'm gonna play the outro as we always do, and hope you're safe, and we'll see you next time.
Have a good evening.